Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert.
Is it easy to do? No, it's not easy to combine a cyber and a physical attack. That takes an organization. It's not something most individuals are capable on their own. And so the advantage for law enforcement is that they perhaps have a smaller subset of adversaries that they have to worry about, but they have a large attack surface.
That was Leo Taddeo, former FBI agent and current CISO. In this episode of the ISF podcast, we bring you the second of 3 conversations with Leo and ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin. In this episode, Leo discusses the challenges of cybercrime and physical infrastructure attack, as well as the threats posed to the densely populated urban area of New York City.
One of the things that we've talked about quite a lot at the ISF, as we look forward to some of the sort of emerging and evolving threats, is this rise in crime as a service. Ransomware and the ability, I think, from a cybercriminal perspective to be able to almost begin an apprenticeship through a crime as a service process and then graduate, if you like, into becoming much more competent in their own right. Is that something that you would agree with, something that you've seen?
Well, certainly we've seen the cybercrime problem grow in a very rational sense, in that they're very efficient, very profit-oriented, and they will invest time and money into areas that are productive, just like a regular corporation will. Any rational enterprise will find the most profitable activity that they're good at and pour as many people and additional resources into that activity until it's no longer profitable. Cybercrime is operating in that way to a T, meaning if ransomware weren't profitable, we wouldn't see as many individuals and sophisticated groups engaging in ransomware. And it wasn't profitable until about 2012, 13, 14. And so you could ask yourself, what changed? What made ransomware profitable? And why did cyber criminals invest so heavily in it? And how did they invest so heavily in it? So if you look back, some of the things that enabled ransomware to be more successful, cryptocurrencies, for example.
Right.
Prior to cryptocurrencies, in order to cash out a successful installation of ransomware, there had to be some bank transfer or some way to get the money, and you needed an infrastructure to cash that out. You needed money mules, so to speak, and that created a paper trail. And if you were in Eastern Europe and your victim was in the United States, you had to change the currency from dollars to whatever currency you're comfortable with, and that meant cross-border transactions. Cryptocurrency eliminated all of that, and it made the cashing out phase of ransomware much simpler. And so once that potential obstacle was removed, ransomware became one of the most prevalent cyber crimes that we face. And when it became profitable, more people engaged in it. And when more people engaged in it, more innovation took place, more research and development. And as I said, it's perfectly rational. If you're taking a percentage of your profits and reinvesting it in the business, you're hiring more people, you're advancing your product, which may be a particular set of malware, or you're advancing your infrastructure, meaning you're able to target more people because you're figuring out ways of using bots, for example, to infect as many people as possible. All of that innovation mimics what we see in the private sector. It's an extraordinarily predictable endeavor.
I want to move a little bit into looking at the overall infrastructure. A lot of concern around, the potential for not just physical attack, but also a combination of cyber and physical, particularly on critical infrastructure, exploitation perhaps of Internet of Things-based devices, the whole smart city environment. And tell us a little bit about that in your experience.
Right. So I think municipalities in New York, being at the top of the target list, if you will, have to think about these blended types of attacks. New York faces what I refer to as full spectrum adversaries, meaning they have the ability to conduct physical attacks, cyber attacks, and also perhaps insider threat, which is particularly daunting because if you combine those capabilities, you have an enormously complex adversary and potential attack vectors. Is it easy to do? No, it's not easy to combine a cyber and a physical attack. That takes an organization. It's not something most individuals are capable on their own. And so the advantage for law enforcement is that they perhaps have a smaller subset of adversaries that they have to worry about, but they have a large attack surface. So if you think about the New York City area, 70% or so, depending on how you measure it, of the United States financial industry is located in or around New York City. That all sits on top of a very complex urban infrastructure, meaning water delivery systems, power systems, subways, communications, emergency response. Impacting those systems is a way to impact the financial sector. If the bank can't get employees to the office because the subways aren't working, then the bank may not be able to operate, at least at peak efficiency. The financial sector is very well prepared in disaster recovery and also in redundancy, so it would be enormously difficult to do, but not outside the realm of possibility. If you could shut down the power, for example, in New York City, you would create a significant disruption, perhaps force the financial sector to trigger their recovery systems, which are well tested and operate. But still, you have an impact. We saw in 2013 the Iranians using denial of service attacks against the financial sector. And while not capable of shutting down the banking sector, it did impede retail banking customers from reaching their banks. And sometimes that kind of nuisance is all it takes for an adversary to achieve his objectives. So to answer your question, this is a vulnerable point for the United States. We rely very heavily on systems that are networked. Anything that is networked is reachable by an adversary, and protecting those systems is a continuing challenge because they change. They change what they're connected to, they change their operating systems, and they change where they're located. And all of that change is a challenge for security professionals, because if you can have a static environment to protect, that's one type of challenge. But if you have an environment that's complex and also moving, that's another set of challenges. So U.S. law enforcement, federal law enforcement in general, and local agencies are working together. They're sharing information. Is it perfect? No. Is there work to be done? Yes, and that's why these professionals go to work every day, to make it more efficient and more complete.
Right. So it's a constantly shifting space, as you said. So how can a chief information security officer, for instance, at any organization, keep up with this constantly shifting, morphing threat landscape?
It depends on the enterprise that you're protecting, on their appetite for risk, on their appetite for investing in security. It depends on the enterprise's security culture. So that answer changes depending on the organization you're protecting and the assets you're protecting. In general, CISOs have budget constraints just like any other division with the company, and they have to make decisions on what their priorities are. You can't implement all of the security tools that you want to because there are budget and staffing restrictions. There are also operational restrictions. So in the sense of what should CISOs be thinking about, CISOs are all spending a large part of their workday and thought process in protecting what is. They need to take a bit out of their day and think about protecting what is coming and what will be the future state of the enterprise. That's a continuing challenge, because protecting what is already complex enough. We have a lot of legacy systems that don't have security built into them. And so we're spending 95% of our time looking backwards, trying to protect the things that aren't sufficiently protected. And playing catch-up with an adversary isn't a good position to be in. If the adversary has initiative, then you're always reacting, and reacting is not favorable for defense. You want to have an active defense. You want to be able to predict where the adversary is going and raise the kind of defenses that are necessary for the future. There's a lot baked into that. There are a number of technology challenges. There are a number of technology in the sense that what is ground truth for security technology? There's confusion in the market because there's vendor chaff in the air. Many vendors have claimed capabilities that later turn out to be less than what is in the marketing material, and there are challenges in infrastructure in that old infrastructure becomes harder to protect once you really take a close look at it. And then there are process challenges. So, for example, if we stopped operating, we'd be perfectly safe, but that wouldn't be a valid business model.
Right.
So how much business impact and operational impact is a company willing to tolerate? Can we take a sales team offline while we install a security tool on their systems? And many times that's a more real risk than a potential adversary impacting the system. So if you're, for example, the chief operating officer, COO for a company, and you're assessing risk across the enterprise, of course, cyber is a risk, but so is operational interruption. And operational interruption is more real in most cases and more imminent and more impactful than some potential adversary in Eastern Europe who might or might not attack us. And so when you're taking a rational approach on how to keep this business running and how to keep it competitive, because another risk is to be slightly less competitive than your market will allow, and then you have a business risk that is existential. So all of that is in the CISO's mind. And really what I'm getting at is the CISO today has to have more of a business approach to protecting the enterprise than a technology approach. So there are different types of CISOs. Some CISOs are the smartest technician in the company, and that's a great thing if that's what's necessary. And many CISOs today are more of a business manager and leader and change agent, if you will. That may be an overused term. But CISOs have to think more along the lines of how do I integrate what is required of my department into the rest of the business rather than having the most secure security options. And being perfectly secure may not align with what the business really needs. And that's the challenge for CISOs as well.
Yeah, absolutely right. And any tips that you can offer to CISOs to get that balance right? It's a juggling act, right?
Right. I think it depends, again, on the enterprise and on the status of the challenge. So if you have a very mature security organization, then perhaps change is difficult because it's baked in so deeply. So every CISO has to assess where his or her enterprise is from a security point of view. Maturity, what past investments have been made, because many times past investments drive future expenditures. You don't want to unravel something you've spent a lot of money on unless there's a very good reason and you can save money in the future. So each CISO and each enterprise will face a different set of challenges. In the general sense, it's very important for CISOs to be listeners of the other colleagues in the C-suite. So if you're not listening to the product teams, if you're not listening to the sales teams, if you're not listening very closely to the strategy of the company and where it's going and bake that into your plans, you may be building defenses for an enterprise that isn't going to come to reality in a year or two. You may be protecting the wrong things at the wrong time. And so we always say, and it's kind of overused, a good player knows where the puck is. A great player knows where the puck is going to be. And a CISO today has to know where the company's going to be in order to be effective in projecting out in the future.
Thanks for tuning in to the second of our three-part series with Leo Taddeo. Next time, we bring you the last of our three-part series, in which Leo focuses on the role of the CISO in protecting assets and responding appropriately to cyber threats.
Culture is super fundamental. Culture is perhaps the most important element in protecting an organization, and it starts at the top.
We know you'll look forward to that conversation, and in the meantime, for more resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And we'd like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. Thanks for listening.